On behalf of the Office of Interdisciplinary Studies, Ideas at Oakley Jindal Global University, I welcome you all to today's masterclass with Mr. J.S. Deepak. The masterclass is titled Trade Wars, the Why, Wherefore, and Way Forward for India. The masterclass seminar series is a core component of our MSc Development Practice program, where we invite scholars and practitioners from all across the globe to sort of bridge in this gap between classroom learning and introduction to the lived realities of development practice. I'm very thankful to Mr. J.S. Deepak for very graciously accepting our invitation for today's lecture. Mr. Deepak is a retired Indian Administrative Service Officer who served in significant roles, including as Secretary of the Department of Telecom and IT and as India's ambassador to the WTO. With an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, he has extensive experience in economic ministries and trade policy, including serving as India's chief negotiator for the RCEP agreement. He's also led initiatives like the National Optical Fiber Network, BharatNet, and the first spectrum auction in India. After retiring from the IAS, he has held positions at Bharati Enterprises and serves on other company boards as well. Today, Mr. Deepak will discuss the history of trade wars down to Trump Trade War II and examine their causes and impacts, including that on global trade, rules-based order, and value chains. He will also assess how countries are prepared to face the new reality in the trade arena and examine the challenges, strategic dilemma, and a way forward for India. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. The floor is all yours.
Suddenly topple them. So good afternoon, everybody. Dipanshu and friends. It's always a pleasure to come to the Oakley Jindal University as well as Ideas and speak to bright young people. And today I have the opportunity of talking to you on a topic of great current significance. It's a burning topic, if ever there was one, and I'm delighted to be here. I will try, we're starting at 3:20, so how much time do we have? Till 4:15?
Yeah, yes.
So I'll try to keep my presentation to about 30-40 minutes, and then we have an interaction. But if you have a compelling comment or question, do stop me. Do stop me, and we can take it right away. So the presentation outline will be something like this. I'll start off from Trade War I, Trump's first term. He started a trade war which was focused primarily on China. And look at the data and see what exactly happened in 2018-24. Then we come to the new narrative in Trump 2.0, his second term. This of injustice to the US propelling the demands and demands from various other partners, striking deals and declaring victory. And that is what the strategy has been. We go on to look at, will this isolate the US? What will happen to the global trade as well as to the US economy? And what other global effects will it have? Will China fill in the vacuum which the US is apparently creating by withdrawing from various areas? And who is better prepared? And finally, we will have some bit of insight on the experience of India. What has been the experience of India in the trade war? And what is the dilemma we face? And what could be perhaps the way forward? I'll stick my neck out a bit and suggest certain ways of way forward, but then that's something which is open to discussion. So, yeah. So, the trade war 1.0, the US paralyzed the WTO appellate body. one of the key features of the World Trade Organization was that it not only negotiates rules for global trade, it also implements them. And if there's a dispute, it settles dispute quickly and effectively. It's a two-tier dispute settlement system. The panel and the appellate body and the US panel as the appellate body were not allowing members to be appointed to it, which is done by consensus. So if they opposed it, they couldn't be done. Then they put tariffs on steel and aluminum against China, then against the other exporters, whether it was EU, Japan, India, it works. And they started negotiating deals with countries, special arrangements, giving exemptions to some while retaining tariffs against others. All of this was against WTO rules, which have two important components. You have to treat all members the same. It's called the most favored nation treatment. You treat every nation like you treat your most favored nation. And then the national treatment, that you treat imported goods, once they come into your country, the same way as domestic goods. So they violated this, they violated the point-bound tariffs. Every country commits to the WTO that this is a maximum tariff they'll put commodity-wise or item-wise. And the US, by putting tariffs during the Trade War I, violated the agreement. The first trade war was mainly China-focused. It was an attack on China to slow down its growth and development, especially in tech areas, because China was becoming a rival to the US. And ultimately, US and China made a deal where US reduced the tariffs in exchange for China buying commodities like soya, corn, pork, etc. So this is the trade war. What happened in the trade war? Let's look at it from some data. Now, apparently, from this graph, you will see this is China's share of US imports. Over a period from 1990 to 2024. It appears that after the trade war began in 2018, the graph is plunging down. The exports from China to the US are going down. It is true that they decreased by about 5 percentage points during this period. So it appeared that the tariffs were working. If you look at the kinds of goods on which the US imposed tariffs in the first trade war, the lower graph shows the import of goods which were subject to tariffs from China, and the upper graph shows the rest of the world. What it seems to indicate is that US put tariffs on certain items. The export of those items from China to the US went down, as is seen in this graph, substantially, from 140 billion to 60 billion. Also, there was an apparent change in sources of US imports. Imports from China decreased by 5 percentage points, which was made up by increase in exports from Vietnam, about 2 percentage points, Taiwan, Canada, Mexico, India, and South Korea. So they made up for the loss from China. So the trade was getting diverted. Putting tariffs on China made industry and business in other countries competitive, and they started exporting to US items which China could not because of higher tariffs and increased costs. This is what was apparent. But if you look at the real reasons, it's very interesting. The global Chinese exports did not go down. Exports of China to the world continued to increase. And the direction of Chinese goods coming to the US changed. So what the Chinese apparently did is they got other countries, interposed other countries between themselves and the US. This graph shows the exports from Vietnam to the US and imports of Vietnam from China. It's a mirror image. Exports from Vietnam to the US went up by about $6 to $8 billion per month. And the same amount went up in trade between China. So Chinese goods, instead of going directly to the US, were going through Vietnam. And this is largely what happened. The Chinese made investments in other trading partners of the US like Mexico, Thailand, Indonesia, Taiwan, Vietnam, and were able to supply. So they were able to circumvent or defeat the impact of the trade war. And that's why the US quickly made a deal and withdrew the concessions. This was Trump Trade War I. any, if there are, are you with me? Are you guys with me? Does it make some sense? Okay. Now coming to Trade War II, in his second term, Trump and his team were obviously wiser. They realized that the unsophisticated use of tariffs as a blunt instrument had not worked. And China was a difficult kettle of fish. So they made changes. They brought the entire world into the ambit of tariffs. It was not about US-China. In fact, China has been on the background mostly in Trade War II. It's all about US and all other countries. Make US great again by getting benefits out of all the major trading countries of the world. Excuse me. So US created a narrative of being wronged and exploited. They said that they have low tariffs. The average US tariff on the 12,000 lines which are traded is about 3 to 5%. Agriculture, it's a little higher, but the average is about 5%. Indian average is 9%, 17% on agriculture, which is the bound tariff, the applied tariff. Bound tariffs are much higher. We have entitlements. So for apples, we have an entitlement of 50%. You may have a tariff of 10% today, you will take it up to 50%. On grains, we have higher entitlements. On cars, we have an entitlement of 300%. So I can put a tariff of 300% on a Mercedes coming from Europe, and so on and so forth. Traditionally, developing countries have higher entitlements because in the Uruguay rounds, where these bound rates were negotiated, there was a deal that was made. These higher tariff entitlements of developing countries, and India has the highest entitlement, were to offset the benefit that the US had got in the form of entitlements of agriculture subsidies, IPRs, services. They got benefits there. Developing countries got benefits of title and land, and there was a somewhat of a balance agreement in the Uruguay round when the WTO was formed. The US is now painting this narrative that they have been wrong, it has been unjust, which is not exactly the case. And this is a narrative which has not been contested by others, unfortunately. So what they made is they made unilateral demands saying that these low, high tariffs of other countries, lower tariffs there, was making trade asymmetric. They had large deficits, which affected the economic security, which in turn affected the national security. And the WTO rules allow that in the interest of national security, you can take measures. And we will come to this in detail, what kind of things you do and what are the conditions. But they started doing this, using drug trafficking and trade deficits as a reason for putting up tariffs against above the levels committed to the WTO. They used two kinds of strategies. With countries like India, which had high tariffs, they brought in the term of reciprocal tariffs. So if India had an entitlement of putting 100% on cars, they will also put 100% on cars. With countries which had low tariffs, like UK, France, etc., they said balanced trade. So even if you have low tariffs, but you have a trade surplus, I will put tariffs to bring the trade surplus down. So they had a strategy, dual strategy, with different kinds of countries. And in April, on the so-called Liberation Day, they announced tariffs against various countries and gave a 90-day period of waiver to allow negotiations of bilateral deals, which would perhaps allow removal of some of these tariffs. There was no transparency, modifications, exceptions, withdrawals, new tariffs, new products, everything happened. And the rules-based system of trade, where things were determined by consensus and laid out over a period of time, became transactional with one-sided pacts and arbitrary tariff regime. So the whole of the world got affected, and excuse of trade deficit, drugs imports was trotted out to put high tariffs. Then they started negotiating. They gave 90 days of time, as I mentioned, and they started negotiating with individual countries. Now, what were the elements of these negotiations? As I mentioned, in brief, the US made demands, very exorbitant demands. They negotiated a deal which was less than the demands but well above the current situation, and declared victory. And that gave them a lot of mileage with their domestic constituencies. I mean, that was the strategy. So transactional, one-sided pacts were signed. The US the interesting part is they were negotiating bilateral trade deals when the administration did not have the authority of reducing tariffs. In the US system, you need a congressional authority to be able to make concessions in trade negotiations. It's called the Trade Promotion Authority. President Trump's administration does not have it. So they cannot reduce below the WTO rate. So if they have a particular tariff rate for India, which is bounded at WTO, they cannot go below that. We cannot get any benefit. At the same time, they are making demand. So it's called one-sided. In the FTAs that have been signed with number of countries, in the bilateral deals that have been signed with various countries, there have been zero tariffs mostly on US exports, arbitrary tariffs on imports to the US, compulsions to buy US agriculture products like corn, soy, pork, beef, and cotton. They are seeking commitments on rules including those under multilateral negotiation. I mean, this is extraordinary. And we'll just have a look at it in a bit more detail. In this scenario, a win is possible only for the US. And that's why I say there's no balance in these agreements. It's going to be win for the US and loss for others. And this goes with Mr. Trump's personality. They say as a businessman, no one has worked with him twice in his lifetime. Because when he makes a deal, he also makes an enemy. He doesn't make a fair deal. So that is what is happening in the trade arena as well. The question is whether these are real FTAs, where countries are negotiating as per their strengths and per their interests, or they are hurried handshakes to avoid the stick from the US. And all of us can have views on these. Going into it a little more in detail, how did they do it? I call them a phrase which I borrowed from my colleague Ajay Srivastav of the Global Trade Research Institute. Masala deals, mutually agreed settlements achieved through leverage arm twisting. So what is happening is countries are being arm twisted because of the military and economic clout of the US, and liberal use of threats, insinuations, lies to create the narrative and to get a deal are applied to both friends and adversaries. This is interesting. For the first time, a trade war is being waged not only against your adversaries like China or Russia, but also your friends in Europe and India and Australia and Japan and Korea and the world. And a blunt instrument is being used very, very rashly. Countries are being forced to make unequal deals because of arm twisting, and these measures are all illegal. These measures that the US is saying are illegal by both their domestic law as well as by international standard. And we'll come to that. But just to give you an example, US and UK have signed a trade deal. The UK has reduced tariffs on 2,500 lines, while the US has reduced only on 100 lines. So it is asymmetric. They have signed a deal with Vietnam where there is zero tariff for all imports from the US and 25% tariff on all exports from Vietnam to the US. Korea and Japan already had FTAs with the US. They've reneged on those. These were signed 5-6 years back, 8 years back with Korea. They have reneged on that and put tariffs on those countries as well. In Indonesia, they're even asking for commitments. They have all these elements. They're also asking for commitments that you will take a particular stand in the multilateral forum. Indonesia is in favor of abolishing the moratorium on putting customs duties on electronic transmissions. There's a rule every 2 years it extends that no duties can be put on electronic transmissions, like music, books, the works. Indonesia is against it, India is against it, South Africa against it. They have in their bilateral agreement put a condition that Indonesia will not take the standard WTO. So they are kind of binding countries to go against their own interests, even in the multilateral forum. And as far as India is concerned, a wide variety of concessions are being sought. So, what has really happened? I mean, U.S. President Biden, when he came to power, in his inauguration said that the U.S. will use not only the example of its power, but also the power of its example. It will lead by an example. But that has completely gone to the wind. What is more relevant, perhaps, is Henry Kissinger's statement, excuse me, that it is challenging to be an enemy of the US, but to be a friend of the US can be disastrous. And we are realizing that we are supposedly friends of the US, and the deals we are getting are completely asymmetric and against our national interest. Looking at the measures that they are taking, the tariffs that they are putting mainly, they are illegal, I mentioned, both by national standards and international standards. The US Court of International Trade in May 2025 held the tariffs that they have imposed as illegal because the president does not have the authority without congressional sanctions to do it. The authority in the division of work between Congress and executive is with the Congress. So they held that this was ultra-vires and completely illegal and to be dropped. The administration went in appeal, and in August, last month, 28th August, the Court of Appeals also said the same thing. It said the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1970, which the Trump administration is using, does not give the president the power to impose tariffs, duties, or the like, or the power of taxing. So it's clearly illegal by the matter will go to the Supreme Court in mid-October, and let's see what happens. Looking at it from the international perspective, they are not against these. They are also against the WTO law. There is a security exception in international law, which is called Article 21 of the GATT, which, as I have mentioned on the slide, says countries can take measures to meet the it can take security measures to measures it a country can take measures it considers necessary for protection of its essential security interests. Now, there is WTO jurisprudence of this. There was a case of Russia versus Ukraine, where Russia put a blockade on transport of Ukrainian goods to Kazakhstan, etc. in 2019. WTO went into it. It was decided that that was illegal for various reasons. Now, what it says is the measures in the name of security, trade measures which a country takes in the name of security, cannot be self-judging, as the US are. US says that I understand my security interests. This is not something which I can debate with anyone. It's something which I know, and it cannot be justiciable. The WTO, on the other hand, held that measures a country considers necessary has to be the measures which a country considers necessary have to be limited depending upon the situation. They can be applied only in the case of war or international emergency, and they have to be proportionate. And clearly pointed out that trade deficit or smuggling of drugs is not something which can be considered violative of national economic security and national security. So by domestic law, these measures are illegal. As per international law, they are illegal. But because of their clout, they are pushing along. What is the effect on the US itself? I mean, tariffs. He is apparently doing it to cater to his domestic constituency. But it's a very short-term thing most economists believe. it will start affecting the competitiveness of US companies if they get higher priced inputs. I mean, if you put a tariff, the importer pays the tariff. If he gets inputs and raw materials and intermediate products at a higher price, the cost of making a final product and selling it will increase, and it may lead to non-competitiveness both in the domestic market and in the international market, thereby creating problems for American companies. Second is the impact on US consumers. Slightly, I mean, there is going to be a cost inflation for sure. Once, the administration points out that there has been no inflation, prices have not gone up, which is partly true, because what happened is, since this narrative was on, companies in the US have imported huge quantities. If you look at Apple, they imported from India smartphones twice the amount they generally do, and they buffer stocked it so that the price doesn't go up now. But once the buffer stocks get exhausted, the prices will go up and consumers will suffer. In New York City, eggs have not only become expensive, but they are in short supply. You have to queue up at supermarkets to get eggs. Basmati rice is almost out of the US market because it's become so expensive that even the Indian diaspora, when you do Indian diaspora, is no longer using it. So it is making an impact, and ultimately it is likely to impact the US economy in the sense that once your economy is not competitive, both your exports and domestic sale of products will go down, jobs will be at risk, and unemployment rate in the US is also creeping up. It's 4.2% last month, 6% for the lower level for blacks, and 3% for whites as they bring it out. So it's getting into problematic areas. Some people say, some experts argue that this may not be a bad thing. They say Trump will not listen to his counterpart, other leaders. He will not listen to business leaders. He will not listen to experts and think tanks and others. He understands only two languages. One is if there's a blowout in the stock market, that will make him change. And the second thing is if they start losing elections because the people are upset, and that we will know in November. So these are the two, and many are hoping that these kinds of policies which have been implemented will start showing an impact in the areas of domestic elections as well as stock market performance. What are the global effects of this? This is also interesting. I mean, US, we are here. How do we care beyond a point for what happens in the US? So what are the global effects? The US is not only putting tariffs, but is withdrawing itself from multilateral institutions. Multilateral is basically rules-based, and they want to do arbitrary things. So they are withdrawing themselves from the WTO, from the WHO, from the UNFCCC, etc., all of which are institutions to look and solve problems, emerging problems, whether it is health issues, whether it is climate change, or whether it's related to trade and economy. It's also abandoning the use of its soft power through cutting out grants for humanitarian research and health research and for universities. Many of us have, during our student days, and many of you, I'm sure, have looked to the US as aspirational, not only because of their size and clout, both militarily and economically, but because of their soft elements. Every $4 or $10 of humanitarian aid was given by the US. They funded most of the medical research, which has led to vaccines and eradication of diseases, including tropical diseases which were not there. They have led to transformation changes in agriculture. Our own Green Revolution of India was funded by the USAID Ford Foundation, which resulted in the hybrid seeds Dr. Swaminathan developed for wheat to increase production. So all of this is scattering and getting lost. Also, as far as the trade arena is concerned, US is withdrawing. It is absent in most of the dynamic trade corridors. Ruchir Sharma of Morgan Stanley, a reputed academician and trade expert, who in his book Breakout Nations and thereafter says that of the 10 most dynamic trade corridors in the world, dynamic trade corridors means two sides, most of the trade is happening, and trade is happening in newer products rather than traditional products. US is part of only 2, China is part of 6, and EU is part of 5. So the US is regressing and losing its leadership position in various arenas where it was the top dog. And that will have an effect on all of us. I mean, if research grants for medicines and for epidemics and for vaccines go down, the world is going to be affected, including Asia and Africa, and so on and so forth. So the erosion of soft power of the US is something which is something which will be difficult to regain for the US itself. Now, the founding fathers of the US said that the government of the United States should be judged in how it treats those in the dawn of life, the children, those in the twilight of life, the elderly, and those in the shadows of life, the poor, the disadvantaged and marginalized. And in all these measures, the Trump policies are coming out negative. And that's something which will soon, I think, start becoming apparent to US citizens, if not to the world itself, and may have a repercussion. If the US creates a vacuum by going on, what happens? There is a good chance that China, which has made strategic investments, which has been preparing, will step in. It's already, as I mentioned, in the context of the data from the Trade War 1, interposed countries between itself and the US, and so tariffs do not largely do not affect its exports. It has also identified effective bargaining tools like export restrictions on rare earths. China manufacturing factory of the world, as it's called, has huge scale. 70% of all clothes in the world, all shoes in the world, 90% of all EVs and solar wafers of the world are manufactured in China. Most of these, especially the tech products, require rare earths, where China has 90% of the share of production of these rare earths for use in these industries. And by putting export restrictions, it has leveraged its ownership of those to prevent the US from going hammer and tongs. It's also leveraging investments in US treasuries. Something which went largely unnoticed, both Japan and China. Japan was number 1 and China was number 2. Sold $1 trillion each worth of treasuries when the tariff war began. Some experts believe from the financial sector that has restrained Trump. And since they own the treasuries, they start selling, the US market is likely to get into a financial crisis. Thirdly, they have developed alternative markets, ASEAN, EU, Brazil, and India. Indian imports from China are now 100 billion. The trade deficit is around 90 billion. So, in spite of the narrative that they are enemies and they did this in Galwan and we should not import from China and we should be self-reliant, trade from China has increased at a galloping pace, and today it's a deficit nearing $100 billion a year. Similarly with other markets. So what they are losing out in the US is going to the US in a diversionary way or going to other economies. And ultimately they have been able to avoid the negative effects of the trade war. And finally they are leveraging infrastructure support. They give a lot of grants under the old Belt and Road Initiative to various countries in Africa and Asia, and that is giving them support. So in the trade war 1.0, the impact on China was minimal. In trade war 2.0, it perhaps will be even less because they're better prepared. And that's why in this whole thing you don't hear about China. It all supposed to have started off with China. Where's China? Where is the trade deal with China? What is happening? No one here. It's everyone else, which is in the soup. Coming lastly, before I end, this is what I said, the investment, the preparation that China has made. Experience of India. Now, India has been forced to negotiate an asymmetric FTA under threat of tariffs. They put a tariff of 50% on us, 25% tariff and 25% penalty for buying fuel from Russia. So 50% tariff makes many of our industrial sectors like textiles and leather and gem and jewelry and handicrafts, furniture, which we export to the US, job intensive sectors which fill orders for the festive season that is now. They have really been hit. So the government is under pressure to protect these sectors. It needs to get these tariffs down, and therefore it is supposed to negotiate an asymmetric FTA. We've made unilateral concessions already. We've got nothing. Like, to show good faith, tariffs on whiskey were down, bourbon from Kentucky, motorcycles, Harley Davidson. We withdrew a digital tax of 6% which we had imposed on US tech giants. Other wide-ranging tariff concessions. We have said that we will not insist on the escrowing of source code. Source code in technological industries provides technology. If you want to transfer technology, you've got to know the source code in telecom and in various solar and EVs. We have agreed, apparently, in the discussions which are ongoing, to not, as per press reports, not to insist on escrowing the source code. So we will be out of the realm of getting technology from the US. So there are lots of concessions. We're buying more oil, arms from the US. We are revising our nuclear liability laws to bear. We've bent rules to allow entry of Starlings. I mean, I can go on and on. And ultimately, all this is being done to sign an asymmetric agreement on which the US may renege. So US has now, in the last 6 months, has a history of signing an agreement and reneging. The talk in the street is that when the negotiators from Vietnam and US sat down, they negotiated 11% tariff for Vietnamese goods coming to the US. When it came to President Trump, he made a call to the leader and said, I'm making 20%. So it is as fickle and erratic and non-transparent as that. And with Japan and Korea, as you said, they had FTAs. With Mexico and Canada, they had FTAs. They reneged on them and put tariffs. All illegal. So even if we sign an FTA, what is the guarantee that they will agree to it? And finally, we have the problem of rules in services trade and in other areas like digital economy and intellectual property. So looking at all these, my view has been that India can today sign an FTA with every country except the US and China. China, because it's a factory of the world, it has scale. It can supply goods at a price which is much, much lower than what we can manufacture, and our domestic manufacturing will be completely taken off, as happened after we signed the ITA agreement when the electronics industry disappeared after 1997. With the US, the problem is different. They don't manufacture too much, and they are far away, so they're not competitive. But they have gold standard rules. There are rules for digital trade called the Dirty 2 Dozen. There are rules for intellectual property which allow evergreening of patents, which will hurt our generic pharma industry. These kinds of things is what they will insist in the FTA. And agriculture market access. Our farmers are small. They are not subsidized, unlike the US farmers. If we are forced to buy cotton, our cotton farmers, where the farmer suicide is already high because of destitution, will be in desperation. If we buy corn and soy, the other crops and domestic crops will suffer because the prices will be much low. They will be dumped using subsidies. And if we open the market to dairy and poultry, our poultry industry, which is large, and our dairy, which is small and spread, small units spread, will suffer. The US, we eat chicken in India, and Indians prefer drumsticks. Those of you who eat chicken would know, drumsticks are preferred compared to the breast. They prefer the breast because they eat with fork and knife, so they eat large pieces. So when they use the chicken, the drumsticks are considered waste, and 3 years of drumsticks are in cold storage in the US, which they want to dump here. And the price, landed price for that is going to be something like $2 a pound, $4 a kilo. Imagine if drumsticks start landing in here at 300 rupees a kilo and chicken is priced at 700 rupees a kilo. The domestic poultry industry is going to be a shock. So these are the kinds of things. They have a laundry list of demands which is taller than me, 7 pages. I'm 6 feet, it's about 7 feet long, and which is very problematic for our industry and for our agriculture. So, I mean, all this is fine. What is the strategic dilemma for India? What do? Do we resist or do we succumb? Now that's a multi-billion dollar question. And I mean, I will not hazard a recommendation, but I can tell you what is the advantage. If we resist, we could contest the narrative of high tariffs. There is a logic for high tariffs which I mentioned. We can walk away from an unfair deal and not have the same experience like Indonesia, Japan, Korea or the UK had. We will face punitive tariffs which will be higher than our competitors, and our export sectors will get affected. The job intensive export sectors will get affected. But we are slightly different from many others. So there's an indicator called the export intensity. Trade intensity, which is the ratio of exports to GDP. Our export or trade intensity is 22%. Vietnam, it is 90%. Their exports account for 90% of GDP, ours is 22%. So we can resist better to avoid problems in other areas. And we need to change the narrative, show data that on goods trade we may have a $40 billion surplus, but there are other areas like funds flow as royalty, consultancy fees, banking charges, arms purchases. They have a net surplus of about $80 billion per year on items, civil aviation, aircraft, which our companies are buying in large numbers. They have an $80 billion surplus compared to us. So the measure which should be looked at is this. So that we can do this kind of an argument. Not that they are likely to listen. So this is if we resist. What if we succumb? We agree to an unfair FTA like many other countries are doing. Easier to do it, more likely to happen. We will protect some jobs in sectors like textiles and leather and so on and so forth. That will be the advantage. But many other sectors like auto will get impacted. If we allow duty-free import of automobiles, cars, car parts, engines, sub-assemblies and assemblies, our automotive industry, which forms a third of total manufacturing GDP in the country, are likely to get affected. There will be impact on agriculture and farmers, as I've mentioned. There would be gold standard rules which will have a problem on our pharma industry, where we are known as the pharmacy of the world. And we may also be forced, like Indonesia, to dilute our stand on certain issues in the multilateral forum. So the only two advantages: we may protect some of our exports in job intensive areas, and we may be able to get into certain value chains because we will reduce tariffs, and US-led multinational value chains like Apple and so on, we may get some. So these are the pros and cons, a difficult decision which the government is struggling with, and to my mind, either of them is a bad deal. So it's a lose-lose for us. That's the problem with this FTA. So the best thing perhaps is to delay it as far as possible, and I think the government is trying to do that. To avoid it, let the bully waste his energy on others before he gets after you. What could be the way forward for India? Now let me finally, last slide, stick my neck out a bit. I think capitulation is not an option. We should not give up our core interests and red lines just to sign any deal. A quick deal is not a substitute for a good deal. We have to keep it in mind. And you may protect a few sectors, but the economy on the whole, if it gets affected, it's a bad deal. Goods only, zero to C. The US is not a powerhouse of merchandise or goods exports. So we can reduce, do a goods only deal, 0 for 0. excluding agriculture and automotive, which are our key areas, and covering 90% of the US exports. 90% of the US exports today we can say zero, no problem. If they are exporting pistachios and badam and these kinds of things, it's okay. It's high-end cheese, high-end meat, which only the very rich use, not a problem. Bourbon whiskey, not a problem. Demand tariff cuts from an MFN level. But we would say that we are willing to give you zero duty on 90% of the products, but you will also have to reduce to MFN levels. Not from this artificial increased 25% or 50% which you've done, because this is illegal anyway. And demand benefits and services. It's a wrong time to talk of H-1B visas, benefits and totalization and others. But we have strong professionals. Today, ITIS professionals. In the future, nursing professionals, chartered accountants. And we need to demand for them a better deal, both for work, for residence, for travel, and for quotas. So if we can do that, that should be where the negotiations should be, to my mind. I mean, this is just a slide just to show that there would be some opportunities on GVCs. 60% of the volume of global trade is in GVCs. If we are competitive with tariffs and trade facilitation, we may get into GVCs because US is de-risking. They are stopping imports from China, they may shift to India. But that is a small benefit which we may perhaps get. Lastly, coming to the conclusion, trade wars, according to my mind, it has one winner in the short run and none in the long run. It is a negative sum game. Everyone loses whatever may be the immediate effects. Trade can affect jobs, can affect growth, and can lead to recession, as we've seen. It's slowly beginning to happen in the US, and most economists believe that that is going to cascade. Countries have to make difficult choices, as we saw in the case of India, and we are absolutely, as a big economy, between a rock and a hard place. See, India 10 years back might have been insulated from all this because our growth in GDP was because of consumption and investment. It was not because of exports, because the trade engine was not fighting for us. In the last few years, our exports have gone up. So when we are in a position to benefit from exports and leverage them for growth, this monster of tariffs and US measures has come up. So that's a problem for us. And finally, the only way is, I think, skilled negotiations, patience, and courage. I work with the Prime Minister on trade issues, and in national interest, he can take a very tough stance. So my hope is that if properly briefed, India would not sacrifice its core interests and drag this matter till it becomes weaker. We will soon find out. We also have a history of having led from trade. During our colonial period, we unfair trade rules and unfair force upon us has led. Walt Whitman called it the bleeding of India has been the biggest tragedy of the century. Walt Whitman. So we don't want to go there again, have a repeat of that. So we need to perhaps resist and maybe we will not only endure, we will prevail. I think I'll stop there, and I would welcome any comments, questions, whatever. Floor is open. My email is there, or any of you would like to interact, are welcome to do it even after this session.
Step out. No, I'll do Nirmal's job. Let me take it out. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. No, I can be mobile. So we have a pretty diverse bunch present here today, because I was also able to request Swati and her team, who have been working with us in Kapashera on different projects which have, I think, crossovers, linkages, because उद्योग विहार में तो काफ़ी लोग जो काम करते हैं उसमें एक्सपोर्ट ऑर्डर से लिंक्ड काम रहा है. So perspectives from what would be seen as the direct impact, अगर आप कुछ देख रहे हैं in your vicinity and proximity, तो अगर वो शेयर करना चाहें, that would be good. I wanted also Ruchi to sort of reflect. She's faculty at Jesus Mary College, and we have our students, of course, so you might have specific questions and interventions. So let me just very quickly give you a very brief perspective on why a talk like this is particularly relevant for a cohort which is studying development patterns, trajectories, practices. So as you know, in the training of what is called as the literature on growth, which is how development economics was studied, much of the calculations on growth were dependent on productivity measurement. Land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, technology, all of the effects of these and how productive these factors were central to the study of growth, right? But particularly post, I would say, early 90s, the conventional knowledge on growth literature changed. It started to go what were seen as proximate determinants to growth. That yes, you need productivity measurement, you need productivity enhancers, but there's something more that you need to also study, because in many countries, particularly and Deepak would know that a lot of the discussions around the Doha round in WTO brought out the frailties of a asymmetric pact between developing countries and developed countries. Agriculture was a big issue because many countries felt that growth was not trickling down. Just because they were growing at a certain rate and that was 8%, 9%, 10% doesn't mean that everybody was doing well. So academics then got a jolt and they were asked that your policies are not working, what can we do? A lot of this was happening in the US itself. And the conventional system of knowledge changed to include what were now called as deeper determinants to growth. And deeper determinants to growth included study of institutions, study of integration, and geography. These three became as important as land, study of land, labor, capital. So then you had political scientists, you had scholars working around particularly on trade policy issues, and those who would work on fields like economic geography. So you must have heard of Paul Krugman, many of those scholars who were looking at contributions to the study of economic geography as such, how trade happens, how the term GVCs was used, global value chains are emerging. And it is particularly important now more than ever before to understand the role of integration in context to how development trajectories are shaped. So if you would see for a country like India, as Mr. was rightly pointed out, NX, net exports, were not part of our main growth trajectory for very long. It has been a consumption-driven economy, and we have not seen growth emerging from consumption at least from 2013-14 onwards. The recent data is telling us a lot of the lower middle income classes have been struggling. Consumption-driven growth is not happening at the same pace as it was happening before, right? So you have now a situation where does your source of growth come from? Investment utna nahi ho raha, consumption utni grow nahi kar rahi. Government is spending, which is spending enough on capex, infrastructure. And that's where you're seeing the 6.5% growth, whatever is coming. But it has limited fiscal capacity as well. It is not a fiscally expanding state. And we had a very interesting talk on fiscal relationships in the last week itself between the North and the South and their own ability to perform. So where is your source of growth going to come from? So we are at a point where the discussions around the trajectory of growth is very important. And trade becomes that great unifier and possibility for not just India at the stage at where it is, but also in terms of its own outlook towards South Asia, within South Asia, because South Asia itself is struggling, as you're seeing right now, the least amount of integration is in South Asia. You know about what's happening in Nepal, what's happening in Bangladesh. But at the same time, Southeast Asia is a big market which India has failed perhaps to penetrate in terms of its economic integration routes. And that would be good to reflect. If you want to talk about a little bit about your journey with RCEP and what happened and where we can go into that. So that would be one thing which would be interesting to look at. So I want to just briefly ask for reflections because we have time up until 4:30 and we want to sort of wrap up. But the reason I was giving you this bridge anecdote is because a lot of times questions are asked कि भाई हम एक development understanding focused cohort में क्यों trade के aspects को उतना study कर रहे हैं. It is no longer a very silo focused area of study. In economics, it has been very much compartmentalized in international economics, but perhaps that's not the way to look at it. So I want to just ask.
Let me just add to the very valid
Yeah.
points which Dipanshu's made. Three things I wanted to talk about. One is the China one. We have not seen trade effects, positive trade effects. If you look at China, China's GDP per capita was less than ours in 1990. When I joined the government in the IAS in 1982, it was less than us. Today it is 5 times, 4.5 times now. And it's entirely because of trade. They have, the stock of investment in China since 1997 to 2019, Professor Telka has calculated stock of investment in China is $12.5 trillion. In India, it's 460 billion. They have got 25 times the investment. They put it in manufacturing, and you see the scale, etc. Today, BYD, which manufactures electric vehicles, is putting up a factory which is 5 miles by 10 miles. 50 square miles for one factory. It's the size of San Francisco City. So this is the scale they operate on. So trade if China has taken down 800 million people out of the poverty, raised them out of the poverty. So it can make a difference. The second point is about agriculture. Perhaps agriculture subsidies. Why are they so problematic? See, the US, EU, Japan also has subsidy which doesn't export. We're not worried about that. US and EU not only have large subsidy entitlements in billions of dollars, but they have flexibility. They can, if US has an entitlement of $30 billion, they can put all $30 billion on cotton or soy or one thing. So it can sell at zero price almost. The farmers can sell and export at zero price, affecting all the others. In India, we have the rules say we cannot put more than 10% of the cost of production. So that is a big, big problem. So, the tariffs are there to protect us from surges of imports from these kinds of structural problems. If they put even 20% subsidy on cotton, we will not have a single kilo of cotton in India which can outprice them, and the farmers will be destroyed.
Hello. I'm just sharing my experience. मैं कापासेडा कम्युनिटी में माइग्रेंट कम्युनिटी है, मैं वहाँ काम करती हूँ और वहाँ पर टैरिफ की वजह से एम्प्लॉयमेंट का बहुत इशू हो रहा है. जो लोग उद्योग विहार इंडस्ट्री बहुत पास में है और बहुत सारे लोग वहाँ पर काम करने के लिए चाहते हैं, लेकिन टैरिफ बढ़ने की वजह से जो उनके लैंडलॉर्ड्स हैं, जो ओनर्स हैं, उन्होंने कंपनी से लोगों को निकालना शुरू कर दिया है. उन्होंने लिस्टिंग करना शुरू किया है कि कौन से लोगों को निकाला जा सकता है या कितने कम वेज में लोग काम कर सकते हैं. जिनका ज़्यादा वेज है उनको निकाल रहे हैं और जितना कम वेज में आप रुक पाओगे उनको रोक रहे हैं वहाँ पर. तो जिसकी वजह से लोगों का एम्प्लॉयमेंट जा रहा है. दूसरा, जब एम्प्लॉयमेंट जा रहा है तो माइग्रेशन भी बढ़ रहा है. तो जिस एरिया में हम काम कर रहे हैं वो पूरा माइग्रेंट लोगों का एरिया है, तो माइग्रेशन बहुत ज़्यादा हो रहा है. वापस जा रहे हैं लोग. यूपी, बिहार, अलग अलग जगहों से जो लोग आए हैं वो वापस जा रहे हैं. दूसरा, जो आपने मुझे बहुत अच्छे से उसमें देखा कि आपने यूएसएड और WHO का फंडिंग का उसमें बात किया, वो सच में बहुत इफ़ेक्ट किया है. मैं एक संस्था के साथ काम कर रही थी नंदुरबार में, महाराष्ट्र में. वहाँ एक गांव है सावरिया डिगर. कनेक्टिविटी नहीं है, जाने का रास्ता नहीं है. अभी भी लोग नाव से जाते हैं उस गांव में. वहाँ पे यूएसएड काम कर रहा था और उसका फंडिंग वहाँ रुका, जिसकी वजह से वहाँ हेल्थ का जो थोड़ा बहुत रिसोर्सेज था ना वो भी चला गया. तो वहाँ के लिए अभी की जो सिचुएशन है वो बहुत ज़्यादा क्रिटिकल है, बहुत टफ है। तो इंडिया में इफ़ेक्ट्स तो कर रहे हैं, लेकिन बहुत अलग अलग तरीके से और अलग अलग सेक्टर्स में इफ़ेक्ट हो रहा है। तो उसके बारे में
बहुत ही वैलिड बात आपने कही। तिरुपुर जो टेक्सटाइल का हब था, लगभग बंद, कोयम्बटूर के बगल में बंद होने के ऑल एक्सपोर्ट लैंड एंड नो वन वाज बाइंग दोस थिंग्स। श्रिम्प, हम $6 बिलियन का श्रिम्प एक्सपोर्ट करते हैं, 60% goes to the US. Visakhapatnam is the hub for that area. Destitution. And 1.5 lakh workers सूरत के ज्वेलरी इंडस्ट्री से हटा दिए already. This is when tariffs are just coming into effect. But businessmen look at their costs and they have to. And so this is going to lead to a huge amount of distress. Very well pointed out. Thank you.
So just go ahead and then
Hi, good evening, sir. My name is Pranav. I am a student of MSc Development Practice. I am also a practicing advocate. You mentioned that it is illegal, the unfair trade policies that they are bringing in. The WTO appellate body has also raised the issue. Doesn't the other countries have the right to go to ICJ in this?
Trade is not an ICJ issue, it is a WTO issue. What division है?
Right.
WTO में जो है, panel has said that it is illegal, फिर appeal होती है.
Right.
Appeal, in the appeal, that there is a void, there is no judge. So people file appeal and it remains there. So you don't have to implement the judgment. So you are safe from it. That is what is happening.
There is a secondary, I was not aware, thank you for the awareness. Sir, we have seen a lot of programs like skill development, Make in India, the initiatives by the government. But we do not see the practical, output as much as it was promised by the initiatives. However, it is really difficult to manage such a vast demographic country, and such a vast population, and you cannot implement such policies with utmost care. But how do you feel that because at this point, if we see and if we try to compete in the manufacturing sector, we were seriously lagging behind. You yourself mentioned how and on what scale the competitors are at working at this point. So we moved right from the agricultural sector to the tertiary, to the service sector, and now that is the only hope through which we can actually boom or gain some momentum in the economy.
Very,
Thank you.
very useful comment. See, the problem is, I look at it as the bigger problem. Point I mentioned is not against China, it's against the world. I think the US has got convinced, at least the policymakers or those in power in the US have got convinced that China has escaped. They say escape velocity hoti hai for it is escaped and it is going to be a rival to the US. It's ahead in many in technology, it's getting ahead. In infrastructure, it is certainly ahead, and in many other areas. Their strategy seems to be to prevent other countries like India, Brazil, Indonesia, Nigeria, bigger countries of the world, developing countries, to become another China. So what they're doing is, we call it as kicking away the development ladder. Though what this is a term coined by
Arjun Chang.
No, Arjun Chang nahi, this famous professor from Tufts.
Arjun Chang from Cambridge.
Arjun Chang also is used it. So kicking away the development ladder. They will not allow us to benefit from the strategy with the Chinese now. So the war is covertly against us. And the challenge is to maintain rules which do not freeze the non-level playing field against our companies. In areas like digital twin, new areas. आज की तारीख में data. There is no rule for data ownership. Anyone who processes data becomes an owner. Chinese don't let their data go out. The Americans get everyone's data because all the platforms, Google's and Meta and others are there. And Europeans do not allow their data go off because of the privacy law. So India's data and African data is being processed by others. They are extracting value for it, selling it and keeping the profits. India's data has to be used for India's development, and we need laws. And if we agree in FTAs to conditions that we will not do this and we will not do this and abridge our policy space, we will never be able to go ahead. So these are some of the challenges which we face, which are huge challenges, and the government is grappling or struggling with it, but hopefully we will be able to get on it.
Rajit, before you, I think there is a. Oh, you give you the mic, someone. Okay. No, go ahead. We have two mics. Yeah.
I just have one question, sir. Sir, what will happen to our pharma industry now? Because we are going to face a large impact in terms of our pharma industry. So what about that, and what about the job market in will India come up with more number of jobs? Like, because the kind of American foreign trade policies that are there now, do you really think our job market is going to improve?
I wish I could give you a very optimistic answer, but coming to pharma first and jobs later. See, pharma industry, we are called the pharmacy of the world. We are not great ones for research. We have hardly discovered any molecules, one or two which are even still not recognized in the last few years. We are very good formulators. So we get the bulk drug, make it into formulations, sell it to 180 countries, and that's not something that creates a lot of jobs. What do our companies do? They see which are the patents which are expiring. 20 years ke liye patent hota hai. If I invent something, I get a patent for 20 years. When that is expiring, Indian companies are able to produce the same drug with the same effect much cheaper. They make that and they export. Now in the US is trying to plug. They are wanting the patent life to be extended. We call it evergreening of patents. There's a law in India against it. Supreme Court is upheld it. What they're saying is if we change the way it is administered, we make minor changes, it will get another 20 years of patent. If that happens, one major area of interest of our pharma industry will get. Second is China. All the bulk drug is coming from China. So if China becomes difficult, our pharma industry is likely to suffer. And you mentioned about jobs. See, no country in the world has become rich without exports, and no country in the world has been able to export without manufacturing. This is the finding. Arvind Subramaniam and a lot of other scholars have done work on this. And we are not a great services power. You know, sometimes we feel, oh, we are. ठीक है, agriculture में हमारे लिए problem है, industry, manufacturing में problem. Services. We are what I call ourselves a one-trick pony. एक service है, ITS, computer-related services is called, where we are top dog. We are not top of the world. I can say this very frankly, being an engineer and having worked in this sector for decades. We are not the top dog because we are the best. We are top dog because we are the cheapest. And these kinds of things at $100,000 on visa fee, etc., will negate that advantage. And we are, if you look at the services, transportation, tourism, consultancy, travel, I mean the works. Leaders are US and Europe, Japan to some extent. So we do not have much scope in diversifying into services. We are beginning to do something. Our IT prowess will get affected by AI and other problems. So jobs are going to be squashed from both sides. With all the efforts on skilling and on promoting Make in India, manufacturing as a percentage of our GDP has come down from 16 to 13% in the last 10 years when this government has been pushing for Make in India. So it's not working. 12 million, 1 million, no, 120 million, 12 crores is the number of jobs required by a year to make up for disguised unemployment and new employment. We are nowhere there. So, I mean, it's a big challenge. And the hope was that exports will take away some of the load and help us follow the Chinese path. But that is now getting it's big. The hurdles are being placed of all people by the US, which is a tragedy.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Paki, a third year student of political science at LSR. and I'm also a student researcher at CNAS. My question was more of a follow-up. When we talk about the growth trajectory that India is likely to take when we decide whether it is to resist or accept these tariff restrictions, I was wondering if any discourse on economic nationalism could be of help to India, or is it more likely to be detrimental to Indian interests if we go in the direction of economic nationalism, if at all?
By economic nationalism, you mean self-reliance and self.
Yeah, sort of like
sufficiency and that kind of-
prioritizing your consumer needs, your industries, like how conventional economic nationalism unfolds.
It's a very fundamental question. Milton Friedman has said that economists through the ages have been unanimous that trade is beneficial for growth. The old Gandhian model where every village would be self-sufficient, I will make my food, my cloth, my everything. It doesn't work that way. I mean, with the kinds of needs and demands of consumers and others, industry at this day. I mean, either you get into the Varnaprasth kind of a system where everyone is willing to, give up all its needs. I mean, if you look at each of us, what we are wearing, what we eat, what we are interested in, what we read, can it be done in a self-sufficient way? I work for a major telecom company, Airtel. Of all the data that is consumed, each consumer consumes over 1 GB of data a day. 80% of it is coming on submarine cables from abroad. Netflix and Amazon and this, that, and the other. So I think economic nationalism is like, earlier they used to say, religion is the opiate of the masses. So economic nationalism, I would put it in the same category. I mean, you can feel good about it, but it doesn't fill coffers or stomachs. And in this day and age, when the world is a global village, how do you look at India? What do we export? 3 biggest exports are petroleum. We get the crude and export refined petroleum. Gem and jewelry, we get the gold and export. Pharma, we get all the bulk drugs and export. So if you are wanting to be self-sufficient, those stop there as well. So it's just not possible. It's maybe a pious hope in some cases, or it's making a fool of the world in some cases. And that's my personal opinion.
So just a follow-up question on this. I'm Adamya from Lady Shri Ram College, Pol Science Honours. So in India, there are some goods that India only exports, like basmati, the carpet wood that we have. So if that comes to an end, Indians can't consume that much. So anyhow, the supply will rise and they will incur a loss. So
it's happening in shrimps already. You're very right. Huh?
So there were some people from Badohi who work on carpet and all. They have already lost their livelihood. So what is the mechanism for them to fit in other cultures? Because that's an art-intensive culture. It's a skill-based industry. They can't be structuralized in certain other aspects. And the second question was, we have all the thoughts about US exposing all this on India, the tariffs and all. But what about the carbon taxes that UK is imposing on India? That is not so visible in the media world. But all these exist. So there are other countries also who are the same sort of behavior like the US. But because it's very explicit, it just gets the headlines. Just a reflection on that.
Oh, absolutely, very valid points you made. Like the CBAM and other measures of Europe and UK are as problematic and even more. The problem with these measures is that they get copied. If the US is imposing tariffs today, tomorrow EU will do it, day after tomorrow UK will do it, and some others will do it. So it's, bad practices proliferate, When I was working in the social sector, health and education in UP, in the backward districts, we did a lot of effort for bring about behavioral change. Very difficult to get messages across. But rumors, rumors completely bereft of any facts would just spread like fire. That's the same problem. So it's a major challenge, and for these kinds of industries, in the short term, they will require to be supported by government. The Indian market is 1 trillion compared to 1/13 of the global market. So you cannot, beyond a point, survive or have enough number of jobs or create enough wealth in the country without leveraging the global market. As I mentioned, no country has become a higher income country without exports. Never, ever. So that's one problem. So in the short term, the government will have to subsidize. The government is working on it to give some kind of support to exporters like textiles and carpets and prints and basmati and things like that. But that the government has limited fiscal space, as Professor Dipanshu was pointing out, so it can be done. Ultimately, diversifying exports is a way forward. We need to trade more with our neighbors. The point he was making, it is the least integrated area. In India, the problem is the overhang of politics is always there on economics. Free trade agreements are good economics but bad politics. Today, we have no trade with our neighbors. And it's a huge population. I mean, if you look at the population, it's more than the population of Europe. We don't trade with Pakistan, we don't trade with Afghanistan, we don't trade much with Bangladesh and the works. Trade happens. It is estimated $40 billion of products are going to Pakistan through Dubai. So the benefits go to Dubai, the intermediaries get the benefit, whether it's tea or whether it's basmati or whether it's engineering goods or whether it's petroleum, and all kinds of consumer products are going to Pakistan. But the benefits are agriculture products. Our farmers are not getting good prices because the markets are restricted. You can't send farming produce to the US. It's perishable. You can do it in the neighborhood, and we've not been able to do that. In WTO, there's a famous saying, if goods don't cross borders, soldiers win. It also has another impact. If there's dependence, then you will not fight too much, on small issues at least. Look at the Europeans. They killed 20 million of each other in the 2 world wars. 20 million, 2 crore. And they are integrated in the interest of economic development. Within 30 years of 1945 when the World War came to an end, they've integrated. I mean, you see Europe, everything is common standards. You can get, they brag that you can get down into a subway and go anywhere in Europe without having to come out. That's how they're integrated. And it's helping them survive and grow. So we have neglected South Asian trade, we have neglected trade with Africa, which is a 1 trillion market size of us with a billion plus population. And we've neglected CIS countries, Central Asian countries. Of course, now the Ukraine war is there, so that opportunity is not there, but we need to diversify our trade. ASEAN is possible for niche products, but ASEAN is a manufacturing tiger. Not many things you can export to ASEAN or China. We export mostly raw materials and agricultural products. So there is a policy and a strategy has a place in this arena, and it will have to be recalibrated as the world changes. And the most difficult and the most exciting part of this sector is that it's dynamic. What I'm telling you today, some of it will become irrelevant a week later, and some new things will come in and new ideas will have to be done. And that's what makes it exciting and interesting and real time.
Thank you. So